Listen, imagine watching a $200 million blockbuster emphasizing your country, something meant to represent your culture, yet it's dubbed because it wasn't even filmed in your language.
True.
Obviously, it's an American blockbuster, but what is a Chinese legend has been targeted by Disney into becoming one of their biggest media franchises. And even though this is one of their most expensive live-action remakes, it became Disney's first big VOD that they put on Disney Plus with an extra price tag since it cost so much, further proving they really didn't care about Artemis Fowl. So if your country has Disney Plus, you probably got the chance to see it. If it doesn't, shout out our sponsor Shark VPN, because it turns out that the tale of Mulan isn't just representing Chinese culture, but as the director puts it, the culture of Disney. Let me explain. Now, in case you don't know much about the history of the Chinese folklore, Screen Rants and the Things actually have videos that they copied off from John Solo, who breaks down the origins of Mulan, so I would definitely go check those out. But it was in the 90s when Disney got a hold of the tale. Obviously, there had been several silent and black and white films on the legend, but putting the Disney name was massive. I mean, look at Coco. People acted like this was the first movie of its kind, even though Book of Life had just been released not long before. That said, Disney had trouble pushing their Chinese feature in China. In 98, China almost banned the film completely because Disney had previously released a movie about Tibet called Kundun, which pretty much every studio was ignoring to not upset their sales in the East. But surprisingly, Disney took it on. It was directed by Marty Scorsese, and it followed the Dalai Lama's escape from Tibet, where Chinese communists were invading, oppressing, and re-educating the native people. It wasn't English, but the behind the scenes of the movie is pretty cool, showing the amount of detail that they went into it, from getting the actual Dalai Lama to help with the script, the sets, the costumes, to even casting his family and a bunch of non-actors. But because it called out China, they were angrier at Disney than George Lucas and were set on revenge. They practically iced the release of Mulan, delaying the movie for an entire year in order to hurt its box office, and were also threatening to halt all Disney animated broadcasts overseas. And then they even banned Scorsese from China.
Did Disney back you up when the film came out? I mean, did they really put themselves behind it to try and sell it?
Well,
now I know why Scorsese left that rat in The Departed. China has become a massive market. Literally, it's on the horizon to surpass American moviegoers and the American economy as a whole. So financially, it makes sense to want to do business with a country that has that many people. But at what cost? As we know, Disney works with the Chinese government to tune their scripts now, which, I mean, you'd think church and state, film and state. But ever since this incident, which the top dogs at Disney called a mistake and apologized to China for, Disney has fallen in line and makes any changes that the government sees fit. They sought out to not just broadcast things overseas, but to build, which came at the cost of China having full control of the rides, the prices, and even making sure their parades at Disney Shanghai were longer than any other Disney park, as they collect all that data. And Scorsese, well, he ended up making a short film promo for a Chinese casino as well. Pretty much it stars DiCaprio and De Niro staying at a hotel, which it didn't even exist. The whole thing is CGI, as they fight to see who's going to star in Marty's new movie. It was only 15 minutes long, but they got big bucks for it. And they marketed it as a short and shot it in America because it's technically illegal to make an ad for casinos in China. But hey, in the end, it seemed like all those Chinese troubles went away because theme parks. Meanwhile, there's the story of Mulan.
I can explain.
As is the case with every movie, there are different themes that stand out to different people, but the story really is very patriotic. It's not just playing on the idea that the army didn't realize she's a woman, but that she's Chinese. She's one of them. It was less about her looking feminine and more that she just didn't look like the bad guys. Nationalism is a staple throughout all of the incarnations of Mulan, but in the animation you really see the importance of the flags. It's in the intro, it's all over the background, and there's really that sense of duty to serve your country.
A single grain of rice can tip the scale. One man may be the difference between victory and defeat.
Is it Americanized? For sure. And that's another reason why I bombed in China. But the themes of being acknowledged for our true selves, knowing that we're not defined by how others see us, is easier when you're not beholden by your family and ancestors.
Your great-granddaughter had to be a cross-dresser!
I think there is a big difference between the cultures that set apart a room in their homes for the elderly, as opposed to those who rush them into nursing homes. And with that, it does come a bunch of other traditions that eventually clash with a modern way of thinking. And it's in those moments when the anxiety of dishonor kicks in.
Not to mention they'll lose the farm.
So as an animated clash of Western and Eastern values, I think it was successful. The whole premise is that they're gathering young men to serve in the army, and Mulan's father volunteers as tribute since he's the only male, when really he needs life alert. So Mulan tries to take her father's place, but can't because...
Mulan, you dishonor me.
So instead, her purpose is for marriage, and they literally even have her audition for it, with a matchmaker setting it all up. Or as people know her today, Tinder.
They have failed to raise a good daughter.
Luckily, an app doesn't shame you like this, at least publicly. But that's what builds to one of the best scenes in the animated film that involves her cutting her hair, which was cut from the 2020 cut. Like, this clip has 5.8 million views on YouTube, and you thought people didn't they didn't in China. Then what are y'all remaking?
The powerful, the pleasurable, the indestructible Mushu.
Mushu is definitely the most Americanized part in the animation, following the footsteps of Aladdin, which found success by having Robin Williams do his thing, regardless of the Egyptian setting. And so Eddie Murphy came in and got to say as many jokes as he wanted to.
Ping was my best friend growing up.
It's Ping.
Ping. Because Ping did steal my group.
Mushu is the demoted family guardian who's practically an alarm clock for the ancestors when we meet him, but after breaking the stone dragon who's meant to guard Mulan, he decides to take its place, working alongside the Lucky Cricket and guiding Mulan on her journey. And I've always loved the scene where Mushu picks up people in the snow ride down, because it's one of the many that showcases the different techniques and lengths they went to in the animation to get these scenes that I still think hold up to this day.
And Flowplane allowed us to take each of these levels of artwork that we have and sculpt the artwork. And now as you push your camera through those levels of artwork, it really feels a lot more dimensional, but it still looks like artwork. So it's somewhere halfway in between the idea of something that's completely flat that you're moving a camera through and something that's entirely three-dimensional.
As Mulan trains, she also forms a well-rounded relationship with a couple of the soldiers, who at first she gets into a scuffle with. They start low, but that's only to build up the camaraderie that they have until they beat up all the bad guys. They have a great musical number that Disney loves so much, they even use it again in the sequel. But damn, did they disrespect them when the tables turn.
Concubines. Ugly concubines.
Captain Li Shang.
Li Shang is the army captain who trains Mulan in order to save him, and boy is built like Markiplier. He was voiced by B.D. Wong for the English version and Jackie Chan for the Chinese dub, but the singing voice is exactly the person I'd expect to sing for a guy who's fallen for another dude, Donnie Osmond.
I can explain.
So it's true.
Like I said, the action sequences they drew up, I think, rival the $200 million live action ones, and that includes their villain, who I felt was even more menacing as a cartoon.
How many men does it take to deliver a message?
One.
And I think the reason Mulan has resonated with so many people is because the ending is different than all the other Disney princesses. Instead of waiting to be saved by a Prince Charming, she saves him. She paved her own way for herself, her family, and her country, and in the end actually got the credit.
Thank you.
Woo! Sign me up for the next war.
For Mulan 2, they turned it into like the honeymoon movie where Mulan gets married and gets a straight to VHS sequel.
You don't meet a girl like that every dynasty.
Like many classics, it didn't really carry the same weight, especially since they couldn't afford Eddie, so they got Mark Mosley to do the voice for Mushu.
They're together?
Mm-hmm.
Together?
Don't you understand Chinese?
And to give the man credit, he has done also the video games and all the extra voice work for Donkey as well. Most of the sequel really is just Mushu seeing it as a W since he claims credit for them getting together, and it's put the matchmaker out of business. But when he realizes that it's not in his favor, he's just trying the whole movie to sabotage them. They're always fighting, even though at the end, he marries them and somehow unites the kingdoms. The real story is the parallel one going on, where these women are getting married off because they're the emperor's daughters. And you see the parallels to the first and why they look up to Mulan, who's willing to even take their place.
That my duty is to my heart.
My duty is to my heart. Yes.
Obviously, it's nowhere near the quality of the first one, but it still kept to the same themes of finding one's true self while also looking out for your entire country and stuffing as many Mushu one-liners as they could. But when it came to the 2020 version, Disney finally had the chance to put even more money into this timeless tale, even though it ironically contradicted the legend itself.
But first, listen.
So Disney didn't really make that much money with Mulan, so you know their interns are going to be on YouTube claiming videos to scrap up every penny they can. So big shout out to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video and helping people navigate the internet. With all the censorship we've been talking about, there's really no better time to have one, and these guys are really big on access not being tied to nationality. With all the internet surveillance that leads to the mining of our data, Surfshark helps keep you protected all with just one click of a button. You want to be more anonymous online than Ping? Surfshark. Tired of all those pesky ads that listen in on you more than Mushu? Surfshark. Say you're in a country and a movie was released about your culture, but you're geo-blocked? Then probably don't watch that movie. But if you want to, Surfshark. With it, you can protect your search history and all your browsing. That way you don't bring dishonor on you, dishonor on your family. They even offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you're interested in getting a VPN and want to support the channel, head over to surfshark.deal/letmeexplain and use promo code LetMeExplain to get 83% off plus a whole 3 months for free. So shout out to Surfshark for sponsoring this video and helping us tackle subjects that not even the mouse wants to face. So in 2020 alone, there were 4 Mulan movies. Besides Disney's, there are 2 other live-action adaptations, with one actually taking place 10 years after the main events, where the Roarins attack again, and there may even be a more curvy Shang. There's even a Chinese animated film called Kung Fu Mulan. That said, it's also 2020, so for Disney to go the plus route is a pretty big deal. Now, instead of dropping the money for everyone's tickets in your family and taking out a loan for popcorn, you can add a couple of profiles, and now you've got it early, and you can watch it multiple times, unlike previous releases, which banked on kids renting it over and over, which, ain't it funny AMC lost it over Trolls and then didn't say anything when, it's owned by China. Sadly, even though the model can be good, that doesn't mean the movie was. At least, I thought it was okay. Not terrible, but for $200 million, you don't want an okay movie. It is the first Disney blockbuster with an all-Asian cast, which is dope. They dropped over $200 million on this, making Niki Caro, I believe, the 4th woman with a budget over $100 million, much less 2. And when you look at how many projects have been made and you do the math, it's pretty bad. Like, Bryan Singer alone has been given more $100 million budgets than the total number of women have. And if you know Bryan, you shouldn't be trusting that man with anything. Even with all that money, it is still Disney, and I don't know that they still give their filmmakers the same freedom that they used to.
We let the movie find itself. So that's why it was tough in the beginning, because we were searching for a style.
We struggled for a very long time. Remember, some of us were on the movie for 5 years.
And all of that is worked out like months before we keep refining it and keep refining it. So when we get on set and we've only got a certain amount of hours to do our work, that we're not going, oh, what if we did this or what if we did this?
We thought about, let's teach all the painters how to paint watercolor. So we stretched watercolor paper and got it all together, and we bought Chinese brushes and we learned inks, and it was very difficult to teach, a team of 30 artists how to do watercolor.
This movie was not made like that.
With a studio and property as big as this, to me it just feels like the coaches LeBron brings in for the team, I do believe something can have positive attributes. Something can be monumental, and then at the same time, be associated or do things that bring it down. It is a remake of the Disney property, but they didn't want it to be like the animation, so they cut the music and the more cartoony parts so that they can be, more authentic to the original tale. And then, weren't authentic to the original tale, Shang was rearranged so he wouldn't be Mulan superior, and that way they wouldn't get canceled by Western audiences when they showcase their romance.
Very well. But you are my equal.
But then Chinese audiences didn't really like the romance aspect, so they cut the kissing that they were leading up to. Now for the Shang fans, this must be a 0 out of 10, because they took away his status in order to get the girl, then he didn't get the girl, and now he's just singing and barely even fights.
I think we on top of stunt training, which was like maybe 2 to 3 hours a day, we
for you, 2 to 3 hours? Not for me.
They introduced a new character who in the original was just a hawk, but has been fleshed out to correlate with Mulan's powers.
It is Mulan I worry about.
They'll call her a witch. Not witch. Warrior.
She has a pretty close relationship with Mulan, and I think these were the strongest scenes as they test Mulan's inner thoughts. But then she, out of nowhere, sacrifices herself for Mulan, even though I feel like with her powers, she had several other options, but I guess they couldn't have 2 women by the end of it. Bori Khan and the bad guys were changed since, Americans know the Huns, but the Roarins were more accurate to have during this time period. So they got my man, who went from voicing David and Lilo and Stitch to being the big bad, and they also swapped it so that he was the son of the man the Emperor killed, giving it more of that revenge angle. I know you can complain about the authenticity in both, but at least, one isn't as dry and aims to be enjoyable. I just feel like the 2020 version is definitely a product trying to appease as many people as possible. So even though they cut the music, they still put the jingles in there. It's in the score just to blue ball you. Mushu was swapped with a westernized phoenix who guides her inner journey. They cut around scenes to make the dad more sympathetic. They swapped the comedic relief of the grandma for a little sister who could have been cool, and they could have added a lot of nuance there. And she just doesn't like spiders.
Afraid of spiders.
I am matched. What's he like? He's handsome, a little shy, but he's not afraid of spiders.
In fact, they actually have a quote out there where they actually said she is just there to show you what Mulan isn't. I haven't seen a sister in a feature film get disrespected like this in a while. That's the thing with Disney, though, and these big product machines. In the quest to satisfy everyone, they just keep watering it down. Even the horse community was livid. There was also a lot of production stuff that I just felt were weird considering the budget. Like the editing feels like a Much-Dank video. They zoom in more than I do, trying to not trigger the Disney claimbot on footage. And in terms of the action, it is cool that this is the first to be PG-13 in their live action movies, and they almost get the mark right there. I know they were paying homage with their wire work, but, you know, at $200 million, y'all look like a Netflix original series. I do like how they flip Mulan, aiming the fireworks at the mountain, to her duping the bad guys into starting the avalanche instead. But seeing some of her moves, it made me wonder if this insert was less her feeling the rumble, and instead of starting it, then magically getting away on her horse. For some reason, they decided to take the concept of Chi as more of a chosen one, midichlorian type way, and that character who we saw earn it in the animation is kind of just born with it in this one.
Her Chi, the boundless energy of life itself.
Your Chi is strong, Mulan. But Chi is for warriors, not daughters.
Everyone sees it. You must hide the Chi.
The Chi is powerful, Huajun. Why do you hide it?
Legit, there's even a scene where her spidey senses tingle and she catches a bunch of blades. And while I know it can't be too violent, you know, I'm not expecting Disney's The Raid. I was hoping to see more of that warrior aspect in her training, not this force that just makes her special. For example, Yuan, who plays the sergeant in Mulan, was also in The Paper Tigers, which I just caught at Fantasia, and that had much better choreography, while also intertwining it with the culture and the ideas of lineage, all while having a fraction of the cost. She does a lot of funny things, like just watching her people die for a straight minute as she contemplates what to do. Like literally. There's also her big moment when she comes out as Mulan, but she takes off all her armor, which, can you imagine anyone coming into a football game with no pads? Girlie is rushing into war. I think at 200 mil, the way they cut it up is so ugly that it ruins a lot of the action sequences. Like, you don't even get 2 seconds of one frame. They took out the pole clip from the animation, which sets up her big sequence in the third act. But after seeing the sequence in the third act, no wonder. They have the Roarings doing 100-meter dashes up the wall, and yet, with such a big budget, the most effective moments were when they used shadows, when she dupes the bad guys by using her own team's helmets. Like, honestly, it's all the things Blumhouse could afford. That said, you know Donnie Yen came in and did his thing. Like, the camera was struggling to catch this man's bad side and keep it in the PG range. They also had Jet Li play the Emperor, which, you know, meant he sat for most of the movie, but I was surprised to see him considering his most previous comments, but he said he signed on because his daughters wanted to see him in such a massive role. A cool little cameo was having Ming-Na Wen, the original voice actress from Mulan, show up, dressed to look like Mulan as well, in order to pass down the torch, but honestly, girl, it's still yours. I've heard a lot of people praise Liu in her other performances, and you know, I guess I need a copy of those projects because she was just okay here. I mean, I guess she does a decent job considering she has to act like someone who doesn't want the citizens of China to be oppressed. But for 2 hours, I swear it was just...
This is my sad face. This is my curious face. And now I'm confused.
So while I believe a story like this deserves its budget, I wish it was used better. You know, they introduced new things, but just didn't go all the way. But more than anything, I wish Disney learned to pick a side. Now, things are a little different from the 90s. Most Hollywood productions take China into account during pre-production already because they know it's a lot of butts and seats. And while a lot of them are still sending in their scripts for approval, more and more actually have Chinese censors on set, with a big debate being that we should know as the audience which ones are being involved. They already have a ban on the 3 Ts, meaning that no major production or even any other related films can talk about them without China coming down on the studio as a whole. They had Iron Man use a Vivo phone, which tech mogul would never use since it's like China's Boost Mobile, but it helped push the government's plan to have more people on those devices. The Red Dawn remake swapped the villains from being Chinese to North Korean after the movie was shot, and in many cases, they're ready to blacklist anyone who protests against them. International settings are cool, you know, and seeing different actors from all around the globe is awesome, even when the ads get annoying, but it's when literal storylines are altered, and in cases made to be cut away just to appease political powers, that it does alter the entire movie-going experience. It is altering the economy, and honestly, for many, the way they think. For Mulan, the biggest debacle was that they actually credited the government, who we already know has a say on the script. Like, this is the opposite of the God's Not Dead credits, which listed court cases, because here, you search these up and most of them have cases, with all of the atrocities from Chinese officials who are oppressing and re-educating people in camps. The credits include their police force, the government, and even their publicity agents that push out propaganda. So much so, they barred the press to cover this movie. And when you think about it, there's no reason for them to even film in that part of China, other than China wanting them to give them a shout out. Like, you know it's bad when even Trump said, don't do business with them, and Disney was like, Pretty much, Disney's like Texaco during World War II, and the mouse wants its cheese.
Like when LeBron had to be nice to China, you know, like usually he like is really politically active, but he couldn't say anything because of Space Jam.
Now, I've been saying this since Coco, a Pixar movie that had a white dude directing, but also had a crew who knew about the culture, that the film doesn't need to be perfect, but it should first and foremost respect what it's depicting. Mulan 2020 not only had money in mind first, but they still had people studying abroad instead of, I don't know, hiring people who already know it. It's all meant to be entertainment, sure, but the scariest things to watch isn't the remakes not living up to the originals, but the company not standing up for what they claim. In 1998, Disney was willing to risk Mulan's box office to go against China's censorship, and they even made a feature where nobody else would about how oppressive the country was to its own people. And in 2020, they thanked them in the credits.
Disgrace.
Thank you guys for watching this video, and again, a big shout out to Surfshark for sponsoring and for helping out with the channel. You know, it sucks that we have to wait like another 20 years for a good big budget version of Mulan to come out, or at least like, you know, with Disney, with them having like the most money to do it. But, you know, I think audiences are just becoming more aware that they're being targeted by demographics, you know. I've always talked on the idea that treating actors like set dressing and not having the core be authenticity, but instead, you know, these big businesses knowing that they can get new butts in seats if they have people who look like them on screen. And by Disney's own admission, that's exactly what they've done with this project. I want to give a shout out to David Chen, who has an interesting video. They were talking about how they noticed the different accents in the movie, which, you know, being Latino, I've seen a lot of movies where Hollywood tries to pass off an Argentinian person as a Mexican or a Spaniard as a Puerto Rican. Like, they give great insight in that video on the idea of that mix, that while it is awkward, you know, probably as a native speaker, that it also reinforces the nationality aspect of what they're pushing for with the story of Mulan. But, you know, I think it's coming down to a time where whoever, and we know this, whoever's funding these movies is going to have the biggest say on them. And that's why you have things like Warcraft, where, yeah, it's CGI, so it could literally be dubbed for any single country. Or you have the idea that China doesn't like ghosts, so there may be a lot of movies dealing with ghosts that won't get big budgets if they can't make that profit overseas. And, you know, then you take into account all the movies that refuse to be censored, and now they're owned by the mouse. So I don't know where that's going to go. But, you know, the movie is going to come out on Disney Plus regularly, I believe, in November. And that way you can catch it on the site and scroll past it maybe. But I'm curious to know your thoughts down below in the comment section, which you preferred. If there was things that stood out to you, if you're like a big defender of the newest one, if there's anything that you think people are missing, let me know down below. Until next time, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and stream the live action Wendy Wu instead.